Hello everyone and welcome to our Shaolin Talks. I'm so sorry we had a short interruption there, technical difficulty, but now we're back again. So if you're watching us again, welcome back. So as we were explaining earlier on, we are exploring, today's subject is about reading. Obviously this week we've been doing a lot about education, and we thought that reading would be a fantastic subject for us to explore together because it's got some really great importance and some tips on how you can learn how to read better, why it's so important, and some methods, and then we're going to discuss all about reading together. So my name is Martine. I'll just introduce you to everybody here today.
Yeah, my name is Janine.
And my name's Kevin.
Yeah, and Kevin is our special guest today. He is a graduate from Southampton University. And you've been studying?
Law.
You've been studying law, so just graduated.
Just graduated.
That must have been a bit of a tricky time.
Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, I bet it was.
It was tough, especially around this time. With so much chaos. It was very difficult to just, sit down and just read law for hours. But
yeah, I bet. Well, congratulations to you. Yeah, really good. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to be exploring reading today. So we've done a little bit of research on reading and a little bit on actually how written word came about. So when I was researching, actually when we were practicing Chinese medicine as well, we learned this in the practice that the first ever writings came about from China, which is quite interesting to discover, and that the first ever recordings of language that they've discovered so far was a divination on the back of a tortoise shell. So some of the characters were kind of symbolic characters, and they were discovered almost 6,000 years ago. Yes, long time ago. So yeah, and I found it quite interesting that those writings that were discovered were all about nature, were all about
what's around you.
Yeah, what's around you, and quite mystical and quite sort of spiritual teachings. And those were at first were oral traditions, and then some of these oral traditions they wanted to
be passed on.
Yeah, pass on and to memorize, and these are the things that they wanted the future to remember. And some of these future traditions we kind of forgotten. We've kind of forgotten and re-remembering through text nowadays. Also, when I was doing some research, came across some other old texts, old world texts from Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq. And obviously you've got the Egyptians and the hieroglyphics, and bless you, and the hieroglyphics. So yeah, so obviously we could make a whole talk today about the discovery of writing and reading, but this kind of transmission between oral and into writing is quite interesting. I think we could explore this a little bit later on. Yeah. But I think for now, I think it's really interesting now to start off with why we read. So I'm going to hand over to you guys. Like, why do you think it's so important for us to be reading and its significance?
I feel like reading is how we establish our relationship to the world. Essentially everything that we think in words. We conceptualize in words. So what you'll find is that people who have a limited vocabulary, who cannot express themselves, usually have a very limited worldview. So for me, I learned from a very early age that the more I read, the more I could conceptualize more complex thoughts, more complex symbols, and just be able to map out my reality in a much more integrated way. Yeah. So reading is fundamental to me in my life. Yeah,
I think it's really important. I think for example, when you were saying that earlier, when we're doing like diagnosis, one technique that we have to do is when we're describing colour on people's face, we have to use different words to describe what we see, because that way we're able to relate and understand better, and it expands our understanding. So the different types of words that you use to describe something increases your understanding of it, and you're able to expand your knowledge a lot greater.
Well, it's like the more words you have, the more you can distinguish, isn't it, between different things.
Yeah, it's like communication is very important, I think, very, very important. And it is a really important factor, and I think it does increase lots of different abilities, like you said, like would you say would you say it's like critical thinking?
Yeah,
or?
critical thinking. Yeah, I would say so.
But I think it's also a lot to do with your emotions. You can learn a lot about emotions while reading.
Yeah.
So no matter what you read, it's like it can be, if it is fiction, science fiction, whatever. But I think a reading can bring out certain emotions in you, and you can also, if you read a lot of fiction and you kind of identify with the character, you know, they go through certain emotions, and then somehow you also go through these emotions without actually really experiencing the topic, but you kind of, through the character, you're experiencing something. And then sometimes you can learn about yourself, like we talked about last week, where you learn about yourself, how would you react in a certain situation. So if you learn about or read about experiences of other people's experiences, that's what you can learn about as well. Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of different types of books that you could be reading. You've got fiction and autobiographies and magazines and newspapers. There's so many different types of ways in which you can read. What kind of what's your
you're drawn to?
Yeah, what are you? It's quite interesting to find out what people are drawn to. You know, at home, you know, you're watching. You know, you can ask yourself these questions as well. What kind of stuff are you reading, and why are you kind of drawn to those things? So what?
Well, with myself, I always carry two books with me. I always carry non-fiction and I always carry fiction.
Very good.
It's got two. Good balance, brain balance.
Exactly, because on my journey I might just be feeling very poetical and I just want to delve into a fiction, or I might just want to look into psychology and just look into non-fiction. I always carry two books with me wherever I go.
Yeah. I have a pile of books by my bed like this, and then depending on my mood, I choose. Okay, like philosophy, or I've got like one on dogs, or one on herbs, and we just kind of pick them out. Like,
Yeah, it's kind of, your mood is quite. It's kind of what you select, isn't it? What you want to read. No, it's similar.
What do you have?
But my go-to at the moment is fiction. Generally, it's usually fiction. Fantasy, yeah. Biographies, I like biographies as well. I'm quite open to quite a lot of things. So, yeah.
I haven't read a lot of fiction. I read quite a bit. I think it depends what stage you are in your life. You know, so I remember when I was younger, I read quite a lot. What I was into at that time was a lot of theatre. So I remember reading a lot of like plays and a lot of. You know, like Shakespeare and Chekhov and kind of like that kind of stuff. That's what you're into at that time. And then as I changed, I got into my 20s. I was then reading a lot of kind of classics. But then when you in school, what did you guys first learn? Like when you were at school, did that influence you at all? Or have you kind of developed more as you've got older? Do you think? Do you remember what you were reading when you were at school?
I think
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Very long for me.
No, at school you have like, I remember in school you have obviously certain ones that everyone's reading, because you have like your literal canon or whatever you call it, which you have to read. I think I quite like the books we read in school, except for one. But I just didn't like the topic. And other than that, it was also a combination of plays, of classics, of classic authors, and then you go through the more modern stuff. And
I studied English literature in school, so it was very much just reading a lot of the classics. You start with Shakespeare, and you move on to different authors such as Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, and we just explored different texts, and that was interesting for me because I really enjoy seeing how language has evolved over time. And then even going back to what you were saying about how the Egyptians, the Chinese, they communicated with symbols. So that was very interesting as well. It totally changed my worldview. And when I started learning Chinese and seeing how they have different characters, which when paired together can form a whole different word, I just feel like their conceptualization of the world is totally different to mine. I know, for instance, if they pair the sun and the moon, that forms bright. So if you're a bright person, it means that you, of course, embody both polarities, the sun and the moon, light and dark. So that gives a whole different perspective on what intelligence means. It means the idea of balance. So just looking at different language. I'm super into language.
No, it's really cool. It's really cool. Yeah.
So and that's why I think reading is important. Yeah.
It's really interesting when you look at the Chinese language as well. I mean, obviously this is not about, it's all about reading and language and communication. But in our language, when we look at wording, you're just looking at like, this is what I struggled with when I was first reading in school, was you're just looking at the words, you know, and the words have a certain meaning. But like you say in Chinese text or some other sort of traditional text, they have a connection to the universe and they have a symbology behind it. But they do have a symbology as well, because I remember when we were studying theatre and stuff, the symbology is lying within the text. You know, it's like, you know, what they're trying to express, like the symbols, or, you know, like if you watch a movie, or, you know, you can see the symbology behind, or the underlying, you know, symbology behind the text and things like that. It's just in a slightly different way, but yeah. Okay, so we're just going to have a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back to explore some other areas, and something really interesting we're going to really explore with you guys. So don't go away, and come back and join us in a few seconds, a few minutes.
Get a cup of tea.